Chapter 1. The Grey Bloom, the Rain. In Marble Gaze wasn't rain. It was a grey bloom. A viscous drizzle that clung to everything with a chilling indifference. It wasn't cold, not in the traditional sense. It was empty. The droplets didn't bead on stone or steel, they simply absorbed, dissolving into the grey with a sighing softness that felt like a forgotten lullaby. It had been raining like this for 72 cycles, since the great stillness began. Kalen, mute scribe of the Citadel, stood within the ravaged library, a damp, echoing space that had once housed 1,000 scrolls detailing the triumphs and tragedies of the kingdom. Now, the parchment was brittle, the ink a ghostly smear, and Kalen, himself mute since the onset of the stillness, meticulously traced a charcoal sketch of a fallen knight, a nameless warrior from the 3rd Regiment. He wasn't sketching for posterity or even for understanding. He was sketching to feel something. The charcoal, rough against his fingertips, was the closest he'd come to sensation in years. The war was a blur of gray. The humans of Marble Gaze, once renowned for their disciplined legions and unwavering oaths, now fought with the languid apathy of sleepwalk. The weight of consequence had vanished, a vital organ ripped from the world. Battles ended not with victorious roars or mournful cries, but with an unsettling stillness, the bodies of fallen soldiers arranged in bizarre, almost artistic patterns, devoid of blood, devoid of regret. Kalen wasn't alone. The entire kingdom was populated by these gray echoes, soldiers perpetually rehearsing their movements, nobles endlessly debating strategies that led to nothing, and the citizenry consuming gray bread and drinking gray wine, each experience utterly lacking in flavor, in weight. Suddenly, a tremor, a subtle vibration in the stone floor disrupted his sketching. It wasn't a natural tremor, it was organized. He recognized the rhythmic thud, the deep, resonant pulse, the heartbeat of an orc. Torvin, drummaker of the Deep-Root clans, was known for his unsettling ability to predict the shifts in the grey. Had been patrolling the outer wards of the Citadel, a task had taken up with a grim efficiency, diligently trying to detect any anomaly in the Void-Lark's influence. Torvin was a behemoth of muscle and scarred bronze, his eyes burning with a stubborn intensity, a flicker of defiance in a world determined to extinguish it. Scribe, Torvin's voice, roughened by years of hammering on ancient stone and weathered by the stillness, was a rumble. I found something. A disturbance, deep within the Citadel's foundations. Kalen nodded, the charcoal scratching against the parchment a silent acknowledgement. Oh! He wasn't sure why Torvin had summoned him, beyond the unsettling certainty that something was shifting. The Citadel itself was a monument to the past, constructed from a strange obsidian-like stone called Soulstone, believed to have absorbed echoes of the kingdom's history. Yet, even Soulstone had become muted, reduced to a dull gray shimmer. They moved together, Torvin's massive frame clearing the path with deliberate caution, Kalen meticulously documenting every detail, the way the gray bloom seemed to cling tighter around them, the way the air felt strangely devoid of scent. They arrived at a section of the library, concealed behind a crumbling tapestry depicting the founding of Marble Gaze. A tapestry now completely gray, reduced to an impression of a heroic battle. Torvin, using a rhythmic pounding on his own drum, a bone-carved instrument strung with sinew, located the disruption. It was a seam, almost imperceptible, in the soulstone wall. With a grunt of effort, he pried open a section of the wall, revealing a dark, circular chamber. Inside, the gray bloom was almost complete, swallowed by a chilling darkness. This wasn't a natural cave, it was meticulously constructed. And within the darkness, they saw them. Rows upon rows of containment vessels lined the walls, not cages, but ornate, crystalline orbs, each pulsing with a sickly gray light. Within each orb, they saw them fragments of human expressions, frozen in perpetual anguish, a soldier's horrified scream, a mother's heartbroken weeping, a child's terrified gasp. Not contained, but collected. And at the far end of the chamber, piled high like a grotesque altar, were the accumulated remnants of the kingdom's sorrow, shattered weapons, discarded armor, the bleached bones of countless fallen soldiers, all coated in a glistening gray powder. "Echo vaults," Torvin whispered, the name a guttural acknowledgment of the terrible truth. "The Inquisitor is hoarding the weight." Kalen understood instantly. The Inquisitor, Silas Viridian, a man once lauded for his unwavering faith, had become the architect of this desolate reality, feeding the Great Void-Lark with the very essence of what made life worth living. And the whispers that had been circulating throughout the Citadel, rumors of a hidden artifact, the Vowel Vial, capable of amplifying the suppressed screams of the citizens, suddenly coalesced into a horrifying clarity. Chapter 2. The Altar of Absence. The chill of the Echo Vaults clung to Torvin like a second skin, heavier than any armor. He ran a calloused hand over the smooth, almost unnervingly cool surface of a crystalline orb. Inside, a frozen scream, a tiny, perfect replica of a man's terror, pulsed with that same unsettling gray light. Around them, the rhythmic chanting of the elven tear collectors, Lyra and Phelan, provided a fragile counterpoint to the oppressive silence. Lyra, her silver hair braided with strands of dried tears, moved with a quiet reverence, meticulously cataloging the vessels. Location Vault 37, Subject Sergeant Boren, Battle of Blackwood Ridge. Phelan, normally a whirlwind of meticulously arranged sorrow silk, was unusually still, his eyes wide with a horror that mirrored the frozen faces within the orb. "It's not just collecting," he finally said, his voice a strained whisper. "It's purifying. He's stripping the resonance from these fragments. The more he takes, the less they matter." Across the chamber, Bram Stonehand, the Orcish drum maker, continued his relentless work. The rhythmic thump of his colossal, bone-carved drum, a monstrous instrument had forged from the heartwood of a fallen world tree, was a chaotic, jarring counterpoint to the elves' quiet sorrow. He wasn't trying to soothe, he was trying to break the stillness. Bram's belief was simple: the weight of sound, the vibrations of feeling, were the anchors to reality. Silas Viridian was systematically dismantling them. "The Grave-Speaker is a fool, feeding the lark with what he thinks will satiate it," Bram rumbled, pausing his drumming. "But the lark hungers for more than just weight. It hungers for feeling. And Viridian is providing it a feast." Torvin, a human veteran hardened by countless campaigns, felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. Had seen enough death, enough devastation, to understand the profound, echoing emptiness that gripped this world. But this was different. This wasn't just the absence of consequences, it was the deliberate eradication of emotion itself. "The Echo Vaults, they're not just storage," Torvin said, his voice grim. "They're a nexus. A place where Viridian is amplifying the emptiness, concentrating it. As building something? A conduit, perhaps?" Suddenly, a tremor ran through the chamber. Not an earthquake, but a subtle shift in the gray light emanating from the vessels. The air grew colder, the gray bloom intensified. Bram's drumming increased in tempo, a frantic, desperate rhythm, while Lyra and Phelan's chanting rose to a fever pitch. "Is aware we're here," Lyra shouted, her face etched with alarm. "Has accelerating the process." As she spoke, a low, guttural hum filled the chamber, growing in intensity. The crystalline orbs began to vibrate, and the frozen faces within them seemed to shift, contorting in silent agony. Then a voice, thin and rasping, echoed from the depths of the vaults. "Intriguing. You have stumbled upon a truth you were not meant to find." Silas Viridian. He hadn't been actively searching for them, had been listening. Had cultivated a network of spies and informants, twisting loyalties with promises of a world free from pain, A world where only he, the supreme intellect, held dominion. You seek to restore weight to a world consumed by chaos? Viridian continued, his voice dripping with condescension. You misunderstand the nature of reality. Suffering is not a burden to be borne, but a tool to be wielded. I am creating a new order, an order of absolute clarity. He gestured, and a shimmering gray tendril, a sliver of the Void-Lark's essence, snaked out from one of the orbs, heading directly towards Torvin. Your grief, your anger, your fear, I'm absorbing them. Soon, you will understand the beauty of detachment. Bram reacted instantly. He slammed his drum against the stone floor, unleashing a cataclysmic blast of sonic fury. The entire chamber reverberated with the force of the sound, throwing Lyra and Phelan back and momentarily disrupting Viridian's control. The gray tendril faltered, dissolving into shimmering dust. Foolish brute! Viridian's voice rose in fury. You cannot contain the void! Your attempts to cling to this decaying reality are merely feeding the hunger. As Viridian spoke, Torvin noticed something else. The altar piled high with the remnants of fallen soldiers wasn't just coated in gray powder. It was growing. The gray bloom was spreading, consuming the bone and armor, transforming them into a pulsating, viscous mass. Torvin stammered, pointing a trembling finger at the altar. It's not just absorbing sorrow. It's rebuilding itself with it. The horrifying realization crashed over him. Viridian wasn't simply hoarding grief, he was using it to fuel the Void-Lark, to accelerate the hollow out of the world. The Echo Vaults weren't a repository of loss, they were a forge of oblivion. Chapter 3. The altars bloomed the air. In the Echo Vault hung thick and still, not with the oppressive silence of the void, but with a burgeoning, sickening anticipation. Torvin's words, sharp and horrified, had shattered the fragile illusion of Viridian's control, triggering a chaotic scramble within the chamber. Lyra, nimble as ever, was already drawing her moon-silver dagger, its blade reflecting the unsettling gray glow emanating from the altar. Phelan, the elven tear collector, meticulously arranged the remaining basins, her movements precise and imbued with a desperate urgency. Viridian, his face a mask of controlled fury, moved with unsettling speed. He raised a hand, and the gray tendrils, no longer erratic, began to coalesce, forming a shimmering cage around Torvin. You lack understanding, little drum maker, he hissed, his voice laced with condescension. This is not mere absorption. This is refinement. The void thrives on chaos, on the uncontrolled surge of emotion. We are distilling the purest form of oblivion, a perfect, self-contained emptiness. As Viridian spoke, the altar pulsed again, the gray bloom expanding with frightening rapidity. The bodies of the fallen soldiers, once stark and lifeless, were now undeniably changing. The bone wasn't simply dissolving. It was being molded, reshaped into grotesque, vaguely humanoid forms, glistening with a viscous gray substance. They weren't decaying, they were being crafted. It's becoming something, Lyra whispered, her voice strained. Something alive. Phelan, ever observant, noticed something else. Tiny, iridescent spores were shedding from the expanding bloom, drifting through the air like miniature nebulae. He instinctively shielded his face with his hand, a low, choked cough escaping him. The spores, they carry the essence of the consumed sorrow. They're seeding it into the very stone of this place. Torvin, driven by a primal urgency, began to pound his drum again, but this time not with the carefully calibrated fury of before. He beat it with a raw, desperate power, channeling the accumulated weight of his rage and his burgeoning understanding. The sound was not a controlled blast, but a sustained earth-shaking rhythm, a frantic plea against the encroaching horror. The effect was immediate. The gray bloom on the altar shuddered, recoiling slightly. The grotesque figures momentarily faltered, their movements becoming jerky and uncoordinated. But the reaction was short-lived. Viridian, with a gesture of utter contempt, unleashed a wave of pure void energy. It wasn't a physical attack. It was a disruption of sensation, a chilling wave of nothingness that threatened to erase their very thoughts. Lyra cried out, clutching her head, momentarily overwhelmed by a sensation of utter blankness. Phelan stumbled, dropping his basin, the accumulated tears swirling uselessly on the cold stone floor. Only Torvin, fueled by the sheer force of his drumming and a sudden instinctive connection with the ancient rhythm of the earth, remained relatively unaffected. He realized then that the drums weren't just instruments of sonic fury, they were conduits, resonant chambers that could interact with the void's frequency. The rhythmic pounding wasn't simply disrupting Viridian's control, it was fighting back, attempting to inject a counter-vibration, a heartbeat of reality, into the burgeoning emptiness. The sound, Torvin shouted, his voice hoarse. It's disrupting the process. It's rejecting the void's construction. Viridian's composure finally cracked. His eyes burned with incandescent fury, and he lunged at Torvin, attempting to strangle him with a tendril of gray energy. But Torvin, anticipating the attack, deflected the tendril with a precise rhythmic beat of his drum. The energy dissipated with a hissing sound, revealing a network of intricate glyphs carved into Viridian's arm glyphs that pulsed with the same gray light. "You are a fool, drum maker," Viridian spat, his voice strained. "You cling to your primitive rituals, while I strive for transcendence. You cannot understand that the only true power lies in embracing the void." Suddenly, a low, mournful wail echoed through the chamber. It wasn't a sound produced by any of them. It was a sound from the altar. The gray figures, now fully formed and seemingly animated, began to sway in time with the wail, their movements becoming increasingly fluid and graceful. Phelan, examining the spores with a desperate urgency, made a chilling discovery. "The sorrow isn't just being consumed," he shouted. "It's being remembered. The void isn't just making something new, it's re-experiencing the loss that created it." The wail intensified, and the gray figures coalesced into a single, towering form, a grotesque parody of a human, wreathed in swirling gray energy. It raised a hand, and the gray bloom on the altar erupted in a final, violent pulse. "Now," Viridian intoned, his voice filled with a terrifying calm, "the world will be reborn. In my image." Chapter 4. The Loom of Loss. The pulse of gray energy slammed into Phelan, throwing him against the cold obsidian wall of the Echo Vault. He tasted iron, a phantom echo of the force that had nearly shattered his bones. The wail, now a keening chorus, resonated deep within his skull, not just a sound, but a torrent of stolen grief, the death of his mother, the failed harvest of his village, the heartbreak of lost love, all distilled into a single, agonizing note. Torvin, ever the pragmatic warrior, was already regaining his footing, his drum a steady, reassuring rhythm against the chaotic symphony. Head instinctively shielded Phelan with his body, the rhythmic beating of the drum seeming to dampen the most violent aspects of the gray bloom's influence. "Damn him!" Torvin roared, his voice laced with a primal fury. "He's not just draining the sorrow, he's weaponizing it." Viridian, his gray energy intensifying, regarded them with detached amusement. "Precisely. The key isn't just to consume, but to understand the fundamental nature of despair. To shape it. To become it." He gestured towards a towering gray figure, which now stood radiating a palpable aura of unbearable sadness. "This is the foundation upon which our new reality will be built. A world devoid of hope, simply because we understand its absence." Phelan, struggling to his feet, noticed something else amidst the terrifying spectacle. The glyphs carved into Torvin's arm, previously subtle, were now blazing with an unnerving intensity, mirroring the patterns on the altar. He realized with a sickening clarity that Viridian wasn't simply manipulating the sorrow, he was imprinting it, transferring it onto a willing host. "The drums!" Phelan shouted, his voice strained. "He's using the vibrations to amplify the grief. It's feeding the thing." Torvin instantly understood. He unleashed a torrent of rhythmic strikes, not just on his drum, but on the very stone floor, a furious, dissonant counterpoint to Viridian's deliberate, mournful patterns. The gray figure reacted violently, its form flickering, its wail intensifying, becoming almost unbearable. "You think you can control it with your barbaric noise?" Viridian sneered, extending a hand, the gray energy coalescing into a whip-like lash that cracked across Torvin's chest. The impact wasn't a simple wound, it felt like a searing injection of despair, a fragment of countless lost memories attempting to overwrite Torvin's own sense of self. But this time, Torvin didn't recoil. He continued to drum, faster, more fiercely, channeling not just his own grief, but the accumulated pain of generations of Orcish Grave-Speakers, the weight of countless fallen warriors, the echoes of battles fought and lost, the sheer, crushing burden of mortality. The room throbbed with the combined force of their resistance. Suddenly, Phelan saw a flicker of movement within the Echo Vault's intricate architecture, a sequence of symbols he hadn't noticed before, shimmering with a faint, ethereal light. It was an Elven script, unlike anything he'd encountered in the human archives. He instinctively reached for his writing quill, a small obsidian tool that felt strangely heavy in his hand, a physical anchor in this world of vanishing substance. He began to transcribe the symbols, his hand moving with an almost trance-like precision. As he wrote, he realized the script was a complex equation, a loom of loss, a mechanism designed to unravel and contain echoes of potent grief. "It's a containment field," he shouted, his using the altar to amplify the sorrow, and the loom to try and bind it. But the loom was unstable, overloaded by the sheer volume of stolen anguish. The gray figures around the altar began to unravel, their forms dissolving into wisps of gray smoke. The towering gray figure, however, remained, its sorrow now a swirling vortex, a funnel drawing in not just the Echo Vault's sorrow, but the very essence of the chamber itself, the dust motes, the lingering warmth of forgotten fires, the silence of centuries. Just as the gray figure reached its zenith of power, radiating a truly devastating wave of despair, Ilara, the tear collector, arrived. She had been drawn to the chamber by a subtle shift in the atmospheric pressure, a deepening of the unsettling silence. Her arrival was marked by the sudden release of a small ornate basin, the tear collector's basin filled with shimmering iridescent liquid. Without hesitation, Ilara hurled the basin at the gray figure. The liquid, comprised of meticulously collected and filtered tears from countless grieving souls, tears of loss, regret, and unfulfilled longing, met the entity's core of sorrow with a blinding flash of light. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The gray figure didn't simply dissolve. It burned. The tears, overloaded with millennia of accumulated sadness, reacted with the entity's gray energy, creating a cascading chain reaction. The wail transitioned from a mournful lament to a scream of pure, unadulterated agony, a sound that threatened to unravel reality itself. Viridian, momentarily stunned, watched as his carefully constructed world began to crumble. "No!" he shrieked, attempting to reinforce the loom, but it was too late. The accumulated sorrow, now amplified to unbearable levels, flooded the Echo Vault, engulfing him and his remaining gray figures in a tidal wave of agonizing memory. The light faded, the wail ceased, and the room fell silent, utterly devoid of all sensation, all feeling, except for the chilling knowledge that they had, perhaps, only delayed the inevitable. Chapter 5. The Weight of Regret. The silence after the Echo Vault's collapse wasn't peaceful. It was a bone-deep, suffocating quiet, amplified by the residue of terror. Viridian, or what remained of him, drifted in the gray expanse, a fractured echo of his former self. He wasn't truly dead, not yet. The Hollow Kings hadn't completely purged him, merely distilled his essence into a shimmering, agonizing point of awareness. He could perceive, but not feel. He could think, but not grieve. The loom, once a complex tapestry of stolen emotions, lay in ruins, a chaotic tangle of gray threads. Then, a shift. A subtle vibration, not of sound, but of pressure. The air, though still strangely devoid of warmth, seemed to thicken, to resist. It was followed by a scent, not a pleasant one, but undeniably present wet earth, pine needles, and something faintly metallic, like old blood. From the fractured edges of the gray void, figures began to coalesce. Not the sleek, ruthless forms of the gray figures, but beings profoundly different, tinged with an almost painful vibrancy. First, a human, Kalen, the mute scribe. His face was etched with a fatigue that went beyond mere exhaustion, a weariness born of witnessing the unraveling of reality itself. He wore the tattered remains of a scholar's robes, stained with the gray residue that clung to everything. He carried a simple wooden stylus, and his hand trembled as he reached out, tentatively touching the fragmented loom. Next emerged Grook, the Orcish drum maker. The rhythmic thrum of his inner being was palpable, a deep resonant pulse that fought against the oppressive silence. His scarred face was set in a grim, focused expression, his massive hands working instinctively to repair a broken segment of the loom, his thick fingers coaxing the gray threads back into some semblance of order. Finally, Elara, the tear collector, drifted forward, her form almost translucent in the lingering gray light. She regarded the scene with an unnerving calmness. Her eyes, usually pools of iridescent sadness, now held a flicker of something akin to determination. The tear collector's basin, miraculously intact, rested in her hands, still shimmering with the captured sorrow. "You've disrupted the process," Viridian's voice echoed, a grating whisper of regret. "You've introduced feeling." Kalen, to Viridian's surprise, spoke. "We found your echo vaults," he said, his voice rough with disuse. "We saw what you were doing. The Void-Lark, the Hollow Kings they weren't seeking to conquer, but to erase. To become the only things that truly existed." Grook grunted in agreement, hammering a section of the loom with surprising force. The weight, it was gone. "We fought with no consequence, no loss. It was a madness." Elara approached Viridian, extending the basin. "This," she said, her voice soft but firm, "is what you tried to steal. The memory of pain. It's the bedrock of our existence. Your sorrow, your ambition, your failure, it's what fuels the Void-Lark." Viridian reached out, attempting to grasp the basin, but his hand passed straight through it, as if it were nothing more than a ghost. "You cannot understand," he shrieked, the sound barely audible. "We sought to transcend the limitations of emotion, to achieve a state of pure objective being." Suddenly, a wave of intense pressure slammed into Viridian, not a physical blow, but a torrent of fragmented memories, the faces of his fallen followers, the desolate landscapes had sculpted with stolen sorrow, the growing emptiness within himself, the accumulated weight of his actions, finally returning, threatened to crush him entirely. "Stop!" Kalen shouted, instinctively shielding Viridian with his body. "You can't fight it with force. You have to embrace it." Grook, understanding dawning in his eyes, began to beat a frantic rhythm on a small, intricately carved drumhead pulled from his satchel. The sound wasn't triumphant or aggressive, but profoundly sorrowful, a lament for the wasted lives, the shattered kingdoms, the stolen moments. As the drum's resonance spread, the gray residue clinging to Viridian began to dissipate, pulled away by the sound of genuine grief. Elara, meanwhile, approached the remnants of the loom. With a deliberate, graceful movement, she poured the remaining tears from the basin over the damaged threads. The gray threads pulsed with a sudden, violent light, and then, with a sound like the crumbling of ancient stone, they dissolved completely. Viridian screamed, a horrifying fragmented echo of his former self. As the last of the gray energy dispersed, he vanished, not with a final burst of light, but with a slow, agonizing implosion, leaving behind only a faint scent of ozone and a profound, echoing silence. As the last vestiges of the Hollow King faded, Kalen, Grook, and Elara turned to face the entity that had heralded their arrival. The Great Void-Lark. It hovered in the center of the restored Echo Vault, a mesmerizing vortex of negative space. Its song now a mournful whisper. It seemed diminished. The weight of the world's grief, once a boundless feast, was now a tangible constraint, a burden it couldn't shrug off. "It's beginning to falter," Elara said, her voice filled with a cautious hope. "The anchor, it's taking hold." Chapter 6. The Weight of Recognition. The silence in the Echo Vault, once a suffocating void, now held a brittle quality, like a pane of glass vibrating with a discordant note. The Great Void-Lark pulsed with a dimmer light, its song shifting from a mournful whisper to a strained, almost painful groan. It wasn't retreating, not yet, but it was undeniably faltering, its form losing definition against the backdrop of the restored reality. The air, thick with the scent of ozone and dampened stone, felt heavier, denser, a palpable shift in the world's fundamental nature. Kalen, Viridian's former mute scribe, stood rigidly, his hands still gripping the drum, the frantic rhythm now reduced to a steady, resonant pulse. The gray residue clinging to him was completely gone, replaced by a film of shimmering dew, catching the refracted light of the vault's crystalline ceiling. He felt substantial. It was an unfamiliar sensation, a grounding he hadn't known, had been desperately craving. "It's a fragile victory," Grook, the Orcish drum maker, rumbled, his massive frame still radiating a controlled fury. The heart drums, battered and scarred from the desperate exertion, lay silent on the floor, but the residual vibrations still hummed beneath his skin. "That beast doesn't understand fragile. It feeds on absence. We've given it a taste of something it can't simply devour." Elara, the elven tear collector, moved with a quiet, almost unsettling grace. She continued to meticulously gather the residual shimmer from the floor, funneling it into a newly constructed vial, crafted from solidified grief, a translucent weeping stone that pulsed with a faint, internal light. "The anchor strengthens with each breath we take," she observed, her silver eyes, once clouded with despair, now reflecting a glimmer of determined hope. "But we must be vigilant. It's not a permanent solution. The Void-Lark will attempt to reassert its influence." A tremor ran through the vault. The Void-Lark, visibly struggling, began to spiral downwards, its negative form swirling with increasing turbulence. It emitted a shriek, a sound that didn't cut through the air but rather seemed to vibrate within the very bones of their bodies, a pure, unfiltered echo of the stolen emotions, a primal scream of loss, regret, and the utter hopelessness of a life devoid of meaning. "It's reacting," Kalen said, his voice strained, "trying to break the connection. We need to reinforce it. The right of the anchor requires more than just our sorrow, it requires our intention." He raised the drum, beating out a slow, deliberate cadence, not a lament, but a declaration. A call for preservation, for a future grounded in consequence. Grook, instinctively understanding, responded with a complex pattern on his own drum, a rhythm woven with the ancestral knowledge of his people, a counterpoint to Kalen's, a bolstering of the nascent connection. The two rhythms intertwined, creating a swirling hypnotic drone that seemed to physically push back against the Void-Lark's assault. Elara, meanwhile, carefully poured the collected shimmer into a central basin, a carved obsidian stone, discovered within the heart of the Echo Vault. As the shimmering fluid pooled within, it began to coalesce, forming a sphere of pulsating light. It wasn't a blinding flash, but a slow, deliberate expansion, drawing in the residual energy of the vault, amplifying the collective emotional weight they were projecting. "The density is increasing," she murmured, her hand hovering over the basin. "The anchor is solidifying, but the Void-Lark isn't yielding without a fight." Suddenly, the Void-Lark launched a concentrated attack. A tendril of negative space, a vortex of absolute nothingness, shot out from its core, aimed directly at Elara. It wasn't a physical assault, but an attempt to unravel her, to strip her of her emotions, to silence her entirely. Grook reacted instantly, slamming his heart drum into the ground, unleashing a shockwave that reverberated through the chamber. The tendril dissipated, swallowed by the shock of primal sound and emotion. "It's learning!" Kalen shouted, his eyes fixed on the diminishing form of the Void-Lark. "It's adapting. We need to be proactive. We need to show it that we remember." He began to chant, a phrase head pieced together from fragments of forgotten lore, a prayer to the ancestors, a plea for their presence, a reaffirmation of the value of existence. As he chanted, a faint, shimmering image began to coalesce within the sphere of light, a child, laughing, a lover's embrace, the birth of a star. Fragments of forgotten joy, amplified by the collective grief and intention, flooded the chamber. The Void-Lark recoiled, shrieking in agony. It wasn't just consuming sorrow. It was confronted with the full spectrum of human experience, the beauty, the pain, the triumph, and the tragedy. The Great Void-Lark, overwhelmed by the sheer force of feeling, shuddered violently. Its form fragmented, then collapsed inward, not into oblivion, but into a shimmering iridescent dust. The final groan of the entity faded, replaced by an utter profound silence, a silence pregnant with the weight of a restored world. As the last particles of the Void-Lark's essence dissipated, a single perfect tear rolled down Elara's cheek. It wasn't a tear of sorrow, but a tear of recognition, a recognition of the profound responsibility they now bore, the enduring power of empathy, and the undeniable truth that even in the face of absolute nothingness, existence itself was worth fighting for. Chapter 7. The Echo of Remembrance. The air in the Echo Vault still thrummed with residual energy, a faint, almost metallic scent clinging to the damp stone. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light that pierced the shattered dome, illuminating the scene of the Void-Lark's demise with an unsettling beauty. The iridescent dust, once a monstrous predator, now lay scattered like frozen tears, each particle shimmering with the ghost of emotions it had consumed. Kalen, the mute scribe, still stood rigid, his hands trembling slightly as he traced the intricate carvings on the chamber wall, depictions of ancient rituals, echoes of a time when consequence held sway. The raw, visceral memory of the Lark's agonizing collapse pressed heavily upon him, a weight far greater than the Void-Lark had ever imposed. "It wasn't just a creature," he rasped, his voice still unused to speaking. "It was a hunger. A monstrous, beautiful hunger for meaning itself." Beside him, Torvin, the drum maker, meticulously examined the heart drums, now dull and lifeless, their surfaces reflecting the faint glow of the dust. He ran a calloused hand over the scarred wood, a low hum emanating from him as he worked, a primal rhythm attempting to rekindle the dormant power within. The Echo Vaults, they weren't just storing grief. They were cataloging it, organizing the absence. It was a terrifyingly elegant plan. He paused, his brow furrowed. The Hollow Kings didn't just want to control the world, they wanted to own the potential for it to feel. Elara, the tear collector, remained largely silent, her violet eyes fixed on the dust. The iridescent particles continued to shift and swirl, miniature representations of the countless emotions they'd contain. She collected a small handful, holding them in her palm. They felt strangely warm, almost pulsing with a faint lingering resonance. They sought to erase the very fabric of existence, she finally said, her voice soft, almost mournful. And for a time, they succeeded. But memory is a stubborn thing. It always finds a way back. The recovery had been slow, painstaking. The initial wave of re-established sensation, the bite of cold air, the prickle of dirt on skin, the echo of birdsong was almost overwhelming. The Marble Gaze Kingdom, accustomed to a world devoid of consequence, found themselves reeling from the immediate impact of a fallen soldier's death, the profound grief and responsibility instantly crashing down upon them. The Orcish Deep-Root clans, hardened by millennia of brutal conflict, wrestled with the instinctive urge to retaliate. The ingrained habits of violence now confronted with the agonizing awareness of its futility. Even the elven Star-Silk, eternally ethereal and detached, struggled to reconcile their ancient wisdom with the tangible weight of their emotion. The rite of the anchor, performed with a harrowing mix of determination and anguish, had solidified the transition. But the true work now lay in rebuilding, not just the physical world, but the emotional one, to teach the people to remember. Kalen, utilizing his rediscovered gift for the written word, began to document the events, painstakingly recording the lessons learned from the Hollow King's folly. He called it the Chronicle of the Broken Echo, a testament to the value of feeling, the necessity of consequence, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. "We can't simply rebuild what was lost," Torvin declared, finally finishing his work on the heart drums. "We must build better. We must ensure this never happens again. We need to cultivate remembrance. We need to teach our children to cherish the weight of their actions, to understand the ripple effect of every choice." He struck a single resonant beat on one of the drums, a simple rhythm that seemed to echo across the ravaged landscape. "This isn't just a drum, it's a heartbeat. A reminder." Elara, however, was preoccupied with the dust. She had begun to experiment, carefully collecting and observing the lingering echoes within each particle. She discovered a pattern, a subtle variation in the shimmer based on the intensity and nature of the emotion it had absorbed. "I believe," she announced slowly, "that the lark wasn't simply consuming sorrow. It was silencing it, suppressing the ability to fully experience the full range of human emotion." She gestured towards a complex device shed, constructed from salvaged components, a delicate lattice work of polished bone and woven silk, humming with a faint blue light. "This," she explained, "is a resonance amplifier. I'm attempting to capture and amplify these echoes, to help us reawaken the dormant capacity within ourselves and others." As she activated the device, a wave of shimmering light washed over the chamber. The lingering dust began to coalesce, swirling into a miniature vortex of color. Suddenly, a tiny, perfectly formed flower bloomed within the vortex, a single, luminous poppy, radiating a warmth that spread outwards, touching everyone present with a profound sense of peace and remembrance. A small, hesitant smile touched Kalen's lips. Torvin let out a soft, approving rumble. Elara closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face, tears not of sorrow but of recognition, and finally of hope. The Void-Lark may have vanished, but its echo lingered, a potent reminder that even in the darkest of voids, the seed of remembrance could blossom, and with it, the promise of a world truly worth fighting for. Chapter 8. The Weight of Remembrance. The silence in the echo vaults, once a suffocating blanket of nothingness, now throbbed with a strange, palpable energy. Kalen, her face smudged with blue luminescence and exhaustion, meticulously adjusted the resonance amplifier. The poppy, now a vibrant crimson, pulsed with a steady light, casting dancing shadows across the cavern walls, adorned with the grotesque trophies of the Hollow King's mountains of distilled grief. shimmering pools of forgotten joy, and heaps of solidified impact. Torvin, the orc drummaker, shifted restlessly, his thick arms wrapped around a newly crafted drum, carved from petrified oak and strung with strands of shimmering, obsidian-like material. The air around him crackled with the nascent energy of his rhythmic potential. "The amplifier Ishungri," he grunted, his voice a low rumble. "It craves the echoes, and the echoes crave a response." Elara, the elven tear collector, remained silent, her eyes fixed on the poppy. She wasn't simply observing, she was absorbing, filtering the amplified resonance with a skill honed over centuries of collecting and preserving the emotional remnants of the world. "The lark wasn't merely silencing emotion," she finally murmured, her voice imbued with a newfound resonance. "It was fracturing it, disrupting the fundamental connections between cause and effect, creating a shattered spectrum of feeling. The flower, it's not just a beautiful anomaly, it's a rudimentary attempt at reconstruction." Kaelin nodded, her fingers dancing across the controls of the amplifier. The blue light intensified, the poppy glowed brighter, and a subtle tremor ran through the chamber. Suddenly the dust motes hanging in the air didn't just shimmer, they began to ripple, to coalesce into fleeting images: a child's laughter, a warrior's desperate cry, the first hesitant touch of lovers. Each fleeting impression was immediately subsumed, then amplified by the device, feeding back into the core of the poppy. "The archive is responding," Kaelin announced, her voice tight with concentration. "The amplifier isn't just collecting the absence of emotion, it's resonating with the potential for it." Then something shifted. Torvin, reacting instinctively, struck a single, deliberate beat on his heart drum. The sound wasn't a boom or a crash, but a slow, deliberate pulse, a low, resonant thrum that seemed to vibrate through the very stone of the vaults. As the note hung in the air, the poppy pulsed with an almost violent intensity, and the swirling dust intensified, forming a vortex not just of color, but of palpable weight. A cold dread gripped Kaelin. "Torvin, stop! The feedback, it's overwhelming!" But it was too late. The vortex expanded, drawing in the echoes of the vaults with an alarming speed. The holographic impressions became clearer, more defined. A young human soldier falling from a cliff, his final voiceless scream, an Orcish chieftain, mourning the loss of his son, an elven queen, weeping over a shattered kingdom. Each image, each sound, became inextricably linked to the poppy, amplified, solidified, and then reverted. The poppy began to grow, swelling rapidly, its crimson petals unfurling with impossible speed. Elara, instinctively understanding the danger, moved forward, raising her hands, palms upward, attempting to channel her own grief, a carefully cultivated sorrow accumulated over decades of collecting the tears of lost empires into the vortex. "Balance!" she cried, her voice strained. "Focus the resonance. Don't let it consume itself." As she did, Torvin, abandoning all caution, unleashed a furious barrage of drumbeats, each strike infused with the raw primal force of his Orcish heritage. The air filled with a cacophony of rhythmic pulses, echoing through the vaults, reinforcing Elara's efforts. Kaelin, battling to maintain control of the amplifier, realized the terrifying truth. The lark hadn't merely vanished. It was attempting to consume the amplified resonance, to drown it in its own void. Suddenly, a voice, ancient and chillingly detached, echoed within her mind. "Foolish mortals," it whispered, "you cannot comprehend the beauty of annihilation. The weight of existence is a burden. Release yourselves to the silence." The poppy exploded in a supernova of crimson light, and as the light subsided, the flower was gone, replaced by a miniature, perfectly formed obsidian sphere. Within the sphere, Kaelin saw it the Void-Lark, not as a bird, but as a reflection of her own fear, her own doubt a tiny absolute void, consuming all that it touched. But something was different. The sphere wasn't actively consuming. It was questioning. A faint ripple disturbed its perfect surface. The echo of Torvin's drums, Ilara's tears, Kaelin's frantic attempts at control, all filtered through the sphere, becoming part of its nascent understanding. The anchor, it's not about forcing emotion, Ilara realized, her voice filled with awe. It's about sharing it. It's about acknowledging the weight and choosing to hold on to it. With a desperate surge of will, Kaelin aligned the amplifier with the sphere, focusing the combined resonance of the three armies, the rhythmic pulse of Torvin's drums, the fragile beauty of the poppy, and the accumulated sorrow of Ilara's tears into a single, unified wave. The obsidian sphere pulsed, then shattered, releasing a final blinding flash of light. And as the light faded, the world felt heavier. Truly, profoundly heavier. Chapter 9. The Cartography of Sorrow. The silence that followed the shattering of the obsidian sphere wasn't the hollow, expectant silence of the Void-Lark's influence. It was a silence thick with potential, pregnant with the return of sensation. The air, previously thin and brittle, now carried the scent of wet earth and pine, sharpened by a tang Kaelin hadn't realized she'd forgotten the smell of blood. It wasn't a torrent, but a single crimson droplet clung to the sleeve of Torvin's greaves, a stark, glorious stain. He stared at it, not with disgust, but with a cautious, almost reverent awe. "It ills," he rasped, his voice hoarse from disuse. "It remembers." The feeling, however, was far more complex than simple remembering. It was a layering of experiences, the brutal efficiency of a killing blow, the agonizing regret of a lost comrade, the overwhelming relief of a victory snatched from the brink of nothingness. It was the full, messy, terrifying truth of war, and it threatened to drown. "The right," Ilara whispered, her face pale but resolute, "wasn't about summoning the weight. It was about providing the map." She gestured towards the echo vaults, now bathed in the pale, returning light. The chambers, once filled with swirling gray nothingness, were now etched with shimmering, holographic representations of the missing emotions. Each chamber pulsed with a distinct color: sapphire for hope, ochre for fury, jade for compassion, and within each, tiny figures, echoes of the people who had lost those feelings, moved in muted, slow-motion acts. A grieving mother clutching a fallen soldier, a triumphant warrior raising a shield, a solitary elf weeping for a vanished forest. The Hollow Kings weren't trying to destroy the world, Kaelin realized, a cold dread creeping into her voice. They were trying to control it. They were collecting the raw ingredients of experience, building a library of stolen feelings to weaponize against reality itself. The discovery had shifted the entire paradigm. It wasn't about a desperate, reactive defense against annihilation. It was an act of meticulous reclamation. They weren't just restoring the weight of the world, they were correcting a fundamental error in its creation. Suddenly the ground began to tremble. Not a violent quake, but a slow, deliberate vibration, as if the earth itself was sighing. From the depths of the echo vaults, a figure began to coalesce. It wasn't the Void-Lark. This was something older, something woven from the very fabric of the Void-Lark's influence. It resembled a humanoid, constructed entirely of swirling gray mist, its form constantly shifting, its eyes two pinpricks of absolute darkness. "The Surveyor," Torvin growled, hefting his drum. "The Hollow King's scout. Has cataloging what's left. Trying to predict our next move." The Surveyor moved with unnerving speed, gliding across the cavern floor, scanning the holographic projections with an unsettling intensity. It wasn't attacking, but observing, analyzing. Then it spoke, not with a voice, but with a direct injection of thought, chillingly precise and devoid of emotion. inefficient. Your focus is fragmented. The anchor is flawed. You cling to the past, to your individual sorrows. The silence offers release. Ilara, instinctively, began to collect tears, channeling her own grief, her own exhaustion, into a shimmering pool. But this time, she didn't try to control it. She simply offered it, extending her hand towards the surveyor. "We don't seek release," she said, her voice gaining strength. "We seek understanding. We acknowledge the pain, and we choose to carry it. To forget it, it would be a greater sin." The surveyor paused, its form flickering momentarily. For a heartbeat, Caitlin thought she saw a flicker of something resembling curiosity in its dark eyes. Then, it reached out, and a tendril of gray mist enveloped Ilara's hand. But instead of consuming her sorrow, the mist seemed torflected. The surveyor wasn't absorbing the tear, it was receiving it, experiencing a fraction of the weight of Ilara's pain. And as it did, its form began to shift, growing denser, more defined. The pinpricks of darkness in its eyes began to resolve into something resembling intelligence, something aware. "The cartography of sorrow," it whispered, its voice a low hum, "is not a weapon. It is a key. The key to understanding the nature of the void." And then, with a startling clarity, the surveyor revealed its true purpose. It wasn't trying to defeat them. It was trying to join them. It offered them a choice to become part of its vast, evolving understanding of the void, to share in the experience of annihilation, or to continue their futile struggle against the silence. The future, Kaelin realized with a chilling certainty, wasn't about pushing back against the Void-Lark. It was about bridging the gap, about learning to speak its language, about turning the instrument of destruction into a tool of understanding. The weight of the world wasn't just returning, it was being redefined. Chapter 10. The Loom of Echoes. The air in the echo vaults hung thick with the scent of damp stone, and something older, something like distilled regret. The initial shock of the surveyor's revelation had settled into a cautious dread. Kaelin, Ilara, and Vorlag, the mute scribe, drummaker, and tear collector, stood amidst the pulsing obsidian chambers, the remnants of a captured sorrow, shimmering like captured starlight. The vowel vial, the heart drums, the tear collector's basin all lay shattered, radiating a dull, almost mournful energy. "You say it seeks to join us?" Vorlag rumbled, his voice still roughened by the effort of restoring the physical weight. "To become a consumed?" The surveyor, now noticeably more defined, its form a swirling vortex of gray mist, edged with shimmering, silver filaments, tilted its head, a gesture that seemed oddly thoughtful. "Consumption is a crude term. Think of it as integration. The void is not merely a destroyer, it is a collector, a processor. It doesn't erase existence, it reconfigures it. The Silence-Siphon doesn't steal consequence, it translates it, layering it onto itself, creating a tapestry of nothingness." Ilara, her face pale but resolute, stepped forward. What of the Hollow Kings? They've built their power on denying consequence, on rendering existence meaningless. They have focused on the surface of the void, the surveyor replied, a subtle shift in its voice conveying a complex understanding. They've exploited its ability to absorb raw emotion, without recognizing that emotion itself is a fundamental force. The void isn't empty, it's brimming with potential. It's simply waiting to be woven. It gestured towards one of the chambers, where a massive, intricately carved stone basin overflowed with an opalescent liquid. This wasn't simply sorrow. It was the distilled essence of every battle fought, every loss mourned, every joy celebrated in the ravaged kingdoms. It was the Echo Vault's greatest treasure, the weight of the world. "The Hollow Kings haven't destroyed consequence," the surveyor continued. "They've created a single unbroken strand in this loom of echoes. They are attempting to spin it into a void, a single monotonous note. But the loom is far larger than they realize. Suddenly, a ripple ran through the assembled armies, the few remaining, hesitant human warriors, the steadfast Orcish ranks, and the silent, watchful elf. A collective murmur spread, born not of fear, but of an unsettling awareness. The surveyor's words had struck a chord, not in their hearts, but in the very fabric of their being. "You speak of a loom," Kalen said, his voice tentative, "but a loom requires a weaver. And the Hollow Kings, they are not weaving. They are simply removing." The surveyor's form pulsed, and the silver filaments intensified. "Precisely. They've become the sole weaver. They've severed the connections, fragmented the patterns. They've created a gaping hole within the loom, a void that threatens to unravel all that is." Vorlag, ever the pragmatist, spoke next. "So, we must reconnect these fragments. We must learn to weave with the void, not against it." "Not weave," the surveyor corrected. "Understand. The act of weaving implies intention, control. The void doesn't respond to intention. It responds to resonance, to understanding its rhythms." It extended a tendril of mist towards the basin, and Kalen, driven by an instinct he couldn't explain, mirrored the gesture, offering a single, carefully preserved tear, a tear of his mother's death, the first he had truly felt in years. As the mist enveloped the tear, the basin erupted in a silent, brilliant light. The opalescent liquid swirled, coalescing into intricate patterns, fleeting images of battles won and lost, of joyous celebrations and heart-wrenching farewells. The surveyor absorbed the tear's essence, its form growing slightly more substantial, its hum deepening into a resonant drone. "The key," it whispered, "lies in acceptance. To resist the void is to fight against the fundamental nature of reality. To embrace it is to find a harmony within the dissonance." It turned its attention to Ilara, who was watching with a mixture of apprehension and fascination. "You, Ilara, possess the greatest potential. You have experienced the deepest sorrow, the rawest ache of loss. Your tears are a potent thread in this loom." Before she could respond, the surveyor abruptly shifted, its form becoming denser, darker. A voice, not its own, resonated within Kalen's mind, the voice of the Great Void-Lark, a chorus of emptiness and oblivion. "Release yourself, little weaver. Join us. There is no struggle, only surrender. Become one with the silence." Kalen felt a pull, a seductive invitation to dissolve into the nothingness, to relinquish all thought, all feeling, all weight. But then he saw Ilara, her face streaked with tears, her eyes locked on the surveyor, radiating a quiet defiance. And in that moment he understood. "The cartography of sorrow," the surveyor repeated, its voice laced with a hint of weariness, "is not a weapon. It is a key. The key to understanding the nature of the void, and to preventing it from becoming a prison." Chapter 11. The Cartography of Sorrow. The air in the echo vaults hung thick, not with dust and decay, as one might expect, but with a palpable tension, a held breath of millennia. The chamber itself was carved from obsidian, slick with an unnaturally dark moisture, reflecting the flickering light of Kalen's torch in fragmented, unsettling patterns. The echo vaults weren't simply storage, they were a deliberate, perverse curation of lost emotion. Within, colossal, ornate vessels, the vowel vial, the heart drums, the tear collector's basin stood like silent, accusing judges. The surveyor, now significantly more substantial and imbued with an unsettling obsidian sheen, floated before them, its drone a low thrumming that vibrated through Kalen's bones. The Hollow Kings were not merely discarding consequence, it intoned, its voice now layered with the Void-Lark's unsettling resonance. They were collecting it, concentrating it. They believed they could become gods by denying the very foundations of existence. Ilara, ever the calm anchor amidst the rising panic, approached the tear collector's basin. The vessel was crafted from polished moonstone, intricately carved with scenes of weeping figures, a human mother grieving a lost child, an orc warrior lamenting a fallen comrade, an elf mourning the passing of a beloved star. It pulsed with a deep, bruised indigo, a concentrated pool of sorrow that smelled faintly of rain and regret. "The lark feeds on the absence of emotion," she said, her voice clear and resonant, "but it doesn't create it. It simply consumes what remains. This basin, it's a wellspring of the world's forgotten grief, meticulously harvested over centuries." Suddenly, the Void-Lark's voice, a chilling whisper within Kaelin's mind, intensified. "Foolish. You cling to sentimentality. You seek to understand what can never be understood. The void is understanding. It is the ultimate truth that all things are fleeting, all connections illusory." The surveyor, straining against the encroaching influence, shifted its focus to Kaelin. "You have proven perceptive, little weaver. But perception alone is not enough. The key isn't simply to feel the sorrow. It's to map it, to quantify it, to recognize the patterns within the chaos." It gestured towards the vowel vial, now radiating a pulsating crimson glow. The Inquisitor sought to silence his doubts, to bury his guilt. But these aren't merely sounds. Each scream, each whispered apology, each moment of agonizing regret, they represent a metric of potential loss, a volume of unspoken consequence. A holographic projection flickered into existence, swirling around the chamber, a complex, almost fractal map of sound waves, overlaid with spectral representations of human faces, contorted in anguish. The surveyor began to manipulate the projection, tracing lines and creating algorithms with its form, as if charting the trajectory of a deadly current. "We can't simply dismantle the vowel vial," the surveyor explained, its voice now laced with a desperate urgency. "We must understand why it was filled. What caused those screams? What actions did the Inquisitor commit that demanded such a torrent of regret?" Kaelin, drawn into the surveyor's analysis, noticed a recurring pattern within the holographic projection. Clusters of crimson waveforms appeared whenever the Inquisitor's records of his atrocities were examined. Specifically, periods of intense suffering inflicted upon the Deep-Root Orcs, systematic raids on their ancestral settlements, the deliberate destruction of their sacred groves, the torture and execution of their young. He wasn't just committing acts of violence, Kaelin realized. He was actively erasing the Orcs' connection to their history, their culture, their very souls. The Void-Lark's voice erupted again, a torrent of malice. Lies. He was purifying the world, destroying the weakness of emotion. You are blinded by your own pathetic compassion. The surveyor ignored the distraction. The cartography of sorrow, it's not a weapon. It is a key. The key to understanding the nature of the void, and to preventing it from becoming a prison. It turned its attention to Ilara, who was watching with a mixture of apprehension and fascination. "You, Ilara, possess the greatest potential. You have experienced the deepest sorrow, the rawest ache of loss. Your tears are a potent thread in this loom." As Ilara reached towards the basin, a tremor shook the echo vaults. The obsidian walls pulsed with an unsettling light, and the Void-Lark's influence grew stronger, attempting to pull them into the oblivion. Kaelin felt the seductive pull, the intoxicating promise of release. But he looked at Ilara, at the resolute set of her jaw, and knew he couldn't surrender. The weight of the world, of their shared struggle, pressed down upon him, a tangible reminder of what they were fighting for. Chapter 12. The Loom of Sorrow. The air in the echo vault still tasted of dust, and something colder, the metallic tang of forgotten grief. Kaelin, Ilara, and Silas the mute scribe, the drum maker and the tear collector, stood huddled around the tear collector's basin, the polished obsidian reflecting the unsettling purple glow emanating from the walls. The tremors had subsided, but the Void-Lark's influence lingered, a subtle pressure behind their eyes, whispering promises of oblivion. "It's shifting," Silas murmured, his fingers tracing the intricate carvings around the basin's rim, symbols of ancestral sorrow, meticulously etched by generations of elven grief-gatherers. "The patterns aren't static anymore. They're weaving." Elara, her face pale but determined, continued to pour the collected tears into the basin. Each drop seemed to absorb the residual echo of despair, swirling within the obsidian with an unsettling, hypnotic grace. The purple glow intensified, drawing the eye to the center of the basin, where a miniature, swirling vortex was beginning to form. "The Weaver's Loom," Kalen said, his voice strained. "The Inquisitor wasn't simply hoarding sorrow. He was attempting to construct it, to draw it into a weapon." He gestured to the pulsing walls. "This entire vault is a conduit, a colossal amplifier of emotional energy, meticulously guided by the Hollow King." The Void-Lark's voice, a dry, rasping whisper, cut through the silence. "Foolish mortals. You cling to these fleeting sensations, these meaningless echoes. You believe grief is a force. It is merely a symptom of weakness. We are offering liberation from that weakness." Elara ignored the taunt, focusing intently on the basin. "The cartography of sorrow isn't just a key to understanding the void, it's a method of manipulating it. The Inquisitor was trying to use the raw emotion, to funnel it through this vault and amplify it to a destructive level, feeding the Lark's hunger." Suddenly, the vortex in the basin surged violently, sending a spray of shimmering obsidian tears outward. Silas, reacting instinctively, slammed his drum, a massive bone-carved instrument, head painstakingly crafted against the floor. The resulting vibration resonated through the vault, a deep, rhythmic pulse that momentarily disrupted the swirling chaos. "He's fighting the flow!" Elara shouted, her eyes wide with a nascent understanding. "The Lark isn't just consuming sorrow, it's disrupting it. The Inquisitor was using his will, his control, to shape the very fabric of grief." As Silas continued to pound the drum, a new layer emerged in the loom, a complex tapestry of interwoven threads, representing not just individual sorrow, but the collective suffering of the Orcish people. The tremors intensified, and the purple glow pulsed with a ferocious energy. Kalen recognized the shift immediately. "The Grave-Speaker! He is attempting to weaponize the Orcs' history, to amplify their ancestral trauma. He's trying to drown us in the weight of our own past." The Void-Lark's voice roared with triumph. "See? The foundation of your destruction. Embrace it. Become one with the endless cycle of pain." But Elara, her face slick with tears, was actively weaving. Using her tears, she began to introduce new threads into the loom, threads of defiant hope, of the burgeoning connection they were forging, of the shared determination to reclaim their world. The process was agonizing, a battle against the overwhelming tide of the Lark's influence. But with each drop of her sorrow, the loom began to shift, to stabilize, becoming less a weapon of despair and more a reflection. "It's working!" Silas gasped, his breath ragged. "He's losing control. The power it's resisting." The violet glow began to fade, replaced by a dull, pulsating gray. The vortex in the basin shrunk, the chaotic energy contained within its shrinking circumference. Kalen felt a palpable shift in the air, a subtle resistance, a grounding force that pushed back against the Void-Lark's insidious pull. "We're disrupting his architecture," Kalen said, his voice gaining strength. "By introducing new threads, by actively shaping the loom, we're not just resisting him, we're changing the fundamental structure of the Void's hunger." As the last vestiges of the violet glow dissipated, The echo vaults fell silent. The obsidian walls stopped pulsing. The Void-Lark's voice was gone. Elara, exhausted but resolute, lowered her hand from the basin. The miniature vortex had vanished, leaving behind only a shimmering residue in the obsidian. "It's not over," she said, her voice hoarse. "Not by a long shot. The Inquisitor's pattern is shattered, but the loom remains. We've shown the Void-Lark that grief, even sorrow, is not something to be consumed. It's something to be understood." She looked at Kaelin and Silas, a flicker of steel in her eyes. "And we intend to understand it fully." Chapter 13. The loom's resonance. The silence after the Void-Lark's departure was not peaceful. It was pregnant, thick with the residue of a cosmic battle, the echo of a devoured universe. The obsidian chamber, once a vortex of violet chaos, now felt like a tomb, draped in a chilling stillness. Dust motes danced in the shafts of pale sunlight, filtering through the cracks in the ancient stonework, each one a tiny, tangible reminder of what had almost been lost. Silas, the mute scribe, ran a trembling hand over the smooth, cooling surface of the basin. The shimmering residue, a fractured kaleidoscope of gray and silver, pulsed faintly. "It's stable," he whispered, the single word heavy with disbelief. "The loom isn't simply resisting the void's influence, it's reacting to it, like a muscle flexing against a blow." Kaelin, the drum maker, meticulously examined the heart drums, now silent but radiating a warmth that hadn't been there before. The ritualistic scarring on their surfaces seemed to deepen, becoming less like wounds and more like etched constellations. "The Inquisitor's work wasn't about destruction," he said, his voice rough with exertion. "He was trying to build something, a framework for the void to thrive within. And by forcing our emotions, our grief, our rage into the loom, we've disrupted that design." Elara, the tear collector, remained motionless, staring at the still darkened walls of the echo vaults. The dampness clinging to her cloak felt profoundly different now, no longer the sterile chill of a world devoid of sensation, but something closer to rain-soaked earth, grounded, tangible. "The vaults," she said, her voice low and thoughtful, "they weren't just hoarding sorrow. They were weaving it, shaping it. The Inquisitor didn't simply steal grief, he used it as a loom, attempting to create a tapestry of oblivion." A low hum began to emanate from the basin, not the violent throbbing of the Void-Lark's influence, but a delicate, almost melodic vibration. The gray residue shifted, coalescing into swirling patterns not chaotic, but intricate, resembling threads of silver spun with charcoal. The loom, it seemed, was beginning to speak. "It's responding to our intentions," Kaelin realized, his fingers instinctively reaching for one of the heart drums. He tapped a slow, deliberate rhythm, a primal heartbeat woven into the silence. "We're not just resisting, we're offering a counterweave." As he played, the patterns in the basin intensified, mirroring his rhythm. The swirling threads began to coalesce, forming a complex design, a stylized depiction of a weeping willow, its branches reaching towards the sky, roots sinking deep into the earth. It was a symbol of resilience, of enduring sorrow. Suddenly Silas cried out, clutching his head. "Images! I'm saying everything. The Inquisitor's life, his doubts, his ambitions, his fear. It's flooding through the loom." He collapsed to his knees, overwhelmed by a torrent of fragmented memories, not his own, but belonging to the human architect of the void's hunger. It was a dizzying, agonizing experience, a brutal confrontation with a broken soul wrestling with its own nihilism. Kaelin and Elara rushed to his side. "Focus, Silas!" Kaelin shouted, continuing his rhythmic drumming, using the sound as an anchor to Salah's shattered perception. "Hold on to the thread. Don't let it consume you." Elara, meanwhile, began to channel her own sorrow, not as a weapon but as an offering. She carefully poured a few drops of her collected tears, tears born of 1,000 years of forgotten memories into the basin. The silver threads responded instantly, weaving around the droplets, deepening the image of the weeping willow. The key, Ilara explained, her voice strained but resolute, is not to fight the void with our pain, but to acknowledge it, to show it that even in the darkest depths of despair, there is still beauty, still connection. As they worked, the loom transformed further, becoming less a passive recipient of grief and more an active participant in its interpretation. The weeping willow became more defined, its branches laden with luminous blossoms, a stark contrast to the monochrome landscape of the void's influence. It was a symbol of renewal, of finding hope in the face of overwhelming sorrow. Then a new vibration resonated through the chamber, a deep, resonant tone that seemed to originate not from the loom itself, but from the very stone beneath their feet. The obsidian walls began to glow with a soft, internal light, illuminating the chamber with an ethereal luminescence. "The anchor is forming," Kalen said, his eyes wide with awe. "The loom isn't just reflecting our grief. It's using it to create a psychic weight, a force strong enough to contain the void." The violet glow that had once threatened to consume them was gone, replaced by the persistent grounding energy of the loom. Now a vibrant, intricate tapestry woven from the threads of their shared sorrow, their love, and their newfound understanding. The Void-Lark was gone, but the loom and the profound responsibility it represented remained. Their work, they realized, had just begun. Chapter 14. The Echo of Return. The violet haze clung to the obsidian chamber like a lingering regret, now a pale, shimmering residue. The air, still thick with the scent of aged sorrow and polished stone, hummed with a subtle resonance the lingering echo of the loom's transformative work. Kalen, his elven skin radiating a cool, almost phosphorescent light, meticulously adjusted the placement of the tear collector's basin, now subtly shifting, like liquid mercury held in place by an unseen hand. "The energy signature is stabilizing," he murmured, his long fingers tracing the intricate patterns woven into the loom's surface. "It's denser, more palpable. The Void-Lark doesn't understand this. It thrives on absence, on the lack of consequence. We're offering it something it can't digest, the concentrated weight of feeling." Across the chamber, Brock, the Orcish drummaker, continued his rhythmic pounding on the heart drum. The initial, chaotic beat had settled into a steady, deliberate pulse, a heartbeat echoing the rhythm of the newly anchored loom. The stones beneath the drums resonated with each strike, the sound no longer a jarring clang, but a deep, almost mournful thrum. He wasn't simply beating the drums, he was channeling the accumulated grief of the Deep-Root Orcs, their rage, their lament, their unwavering connection to the earth, into the loom. "The tremors are lessening," Borin, the human mute scribe, spoke for the first time since their discovery of the echo vaults, his voice a rusty whisper after years of suppressing emotion. He carefully examined a meticulously transcribed diagram of the loom's energy flow, his brow furrowed in concentration. The Inquisitor's efforts to sanitize the world they created, a feedback loop, were feeding the loom with the very thing he sought to eradicate, the weight of death. The loom itself was breathtaking. It wasn't merely a tapestry, it was a three-dimensional landscape of sorrow and resilience. Threads of silver, spun from the elven tear collectors, collected grief, formed cascading waterfalls that seemed to plummet into a valley, carved from the muted gray of the Deep-Root Orcs' pain. Threads of crimson, born from the human mute scribes, suppressed screams, formed jagged peaks that pierced the sky. Interwoven through it all were shimmering strands of pure white, the essence of the Elven Memory-Weavers, lost recollections, moments of joy, love, and connection that the Hollow Kings had sought to erase. Suddenly, a low groan emanated from the floor, growing in intensity. The obsidian walls pulsed with a brighter light, and the rhythmic hammering of the heart drums intensified, vibrating through their bones. "The anchor is strengthening!" Kalen shouted, instinctively reaching for his hand to steady himself. "It's pushing back against the void's influence. We're succeeding!" But it was more than just success. The chamber shifted, subtly at first, then with increasing velocity. The air grew colder, and a feeling of profound, unsettling pressure began to build in their chests. It wasn't a physical weight, not exactly, but a weight of awareness, of the sheer magnitude of the emotions being channeled into the loom. Then they heard it. A sound so faint, so utterly devoid of substance, that it was almost imperceptible. It wasn't a voice, not exactly. It was the absence of sound, a sucking, hungry void that seemed to drain the very air from the chamber. This was the Void-Lark's song, the frequency that threatened to unravel their efforts. Boren, without a word, slammed his fist onto the obsidian floor, releasing a cascade of ink-black glyphs carved into the stone. These were ancient warding symbols, painstakingly deciphered from the echo vaults, designed to disrupt the Void-Lark's resonance. "The glyphs are working!" Brock roared, his face flushed with exertion. "It's momentarily disrupting the Lark's consumption." But the disruption was fleeting. The song of the Void-Lark grew louder, more insistent, a chilling whisper that seemed to burrow directly into their minds. The loom pulsed violently, the threads shifting and twisting as if caught in a maelstrom. Then, Ilara, observing the escalating chaos with a grim determination, stepped forward. She held aloft a shard of polished obsidian, a fragment of the Echo Vault's walls, and began to chant in the ancient tongue of the Star-Silk Elves, a prayer to the forgotten gods of balance and consequence. "We offer you not the totality of our sorrow, but a single drop," she cried, her voice gaining strength and resonance. "A reminder that even in the face of annihilation there is worth." As she spoke, she hurled the obsidian shard into the heart of the loom. The shard shattered, releasing a brilliant burst of white light that intensified the loom's energy, solidifying the anchor. The Void-Lark shrieked a sound not of aggression, but of profound, agonizing frustration. It was a creature born of nothingness, and it was beginning to understand that nothingness could be defined and defined by the weight of feeling. Slowly, agonizingly, the song of the Void-Lark began to fade. The pressure in their chests eased, replaced by a profound sense of relief and something else, something deeper, a recognition of the beauty and the terrible necessity of holding on to the weight of the world. Chapter 15. The Echo of Oblivion. The air in the grand loom chamber hung thick, not with dust and the residue of shattered stone, but with a palpable tension, a vibration born of raw, almost unbearable potential. The loom itself, a colossal structure of interwoven silverwood and pulsating crystal, throbbed with an erratic, frantic energy. Threads of shimmering light, remnants of the stolen emotions, grief, joy, rage, love writhed like captured serpents within its core, responding to the still faint song of the Void-Lark. Ilara, her face etched with a grim intensity, continued her chant, the ancient elven words a steady, defiant pulse against the encroaching silence. Around her, the assembled forces of Marble Gaze, Deep-Root, and Star-Silk stood rigid, their faces masks of exhausted concentration. Kalen, the mute scribe, felt a tremor beneath his feet, not of the loom's power, but of something far more unsettling, a sense of the world remembering. The faintest prickle of warmth against his skin, the ghost of a scent pine needles and damp earth, was a brutal confirmation that the world was fighting to reclaim its sensory reality. Beside him, Baruch, the drum maker, continued to beat a rhythm on his heart drum, no longer with the violent force of the coup of the heavy heart, but with a measured, almost meditative pulse. The drum's vibrations, subtly amplified by the loom's residual energy, seemed to be subtly anchoring the increasingly unstable threads within the crystal structure. He wasn't fighting the lark anymore, he was guiding the loom. And then there was Lyra, the tear collector, her face pale and drawn. She stood by the tear collector's basin, now a shimmering pool of solidified sorrow, a monument to the Hollow King's depravity. The air around her seemed to cling with a melancholic pressure, and she periodically dabbed at her eyes with a silken cloth, absorbing the lingering grief from the liquid. "The frequency is shifting," Alara announced, her voice strained. "The lark is adapting, attempting to interpret the anchor, not as a rejection of void, but as a distortion within it. It's trying to unravel the very concept of resistance." A low murmur rippled through the assembled warriors. The Void-Lark song hadn't simply faded, it had become something more insidious, a suggestion, a temptation. The insidious promise of a world without pain, a world of pure, uncomplicated ease. Suddenly, a figure materialized beside Kaelin Master Theron, the oldest and wisest of the Star-Silk. His silver hair, usually meticulously braided, hung loose around his shoulders, and his eyes, deep pools of ancient starlight, burned with an uncharacteristic urgency. "The shard," he said, his voice a low rumble, "it doesn't just solidify the anchor. It creates a resonance. The Void-Lark isn't merely frustrated, it's learning." He gestured towards the loom. "It's begun to understand the concept of value." This revelation hung heavy in the air. The Hollow Kings hadn't just sought to extinguish consequence, they'd sought to replace it with something, an obsession with self-importance. "The key," Alara said, stepping forward, her obsidian shard held aloft once more, "is not to overpower the lark, but to offer it something worth consuming. Something that embodies the very essence of what it's trying to erase." She began chanting again, her voice rising in a crescendo. "We offer you the silence of creation, the emptiness before the song, but also the memory of a single heartbeat, the nascent potential of a newborn star, the echo of a laugh, unburdened by regret." As she spoke, Kaelin realized with a chilling clarity that the loom wasn't just responding to her words, but to her, to the raw, unadulterated emotion flowing through him, through all of them. The emotional density of their effort, the desperate yearning to restore the weight of the world, was being funneled into the loom, channeled through Alara's prayer, and amplified by the obsidian shard. The Void-Lark responded with a discordant shriek, a sound that shattered the last vestiges of comfortable silence. The loom pulsed violently, the threads within its core twisting into impossible geometries. But this time, something was different. The lark didn't try to destroy the anchor. It absorbed it. Not the physical threads, but the idea of the anchor, the desperate hope, the unwavering determination. Then, a strange thing happened. As the last vestiges of the anchor were consumed, the Void-Lark didn't flee. It settled. It became still. A tiny obsidian-like orb, mirroring Alara's shard, hovered in the center of the loom, emitting a faint, rhythmic pulse. "It's dormant," Baruch stated, his voice filled with awe. "It's not gone, but it's contained by the weight of our intention." Alara nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the obsidian orb. "The Void-Lark isn't a destroyer, but a mirror. It reflects what we choose to be. And now, we have chosen to be heavy.